There is a story they tell in Algiers. Not the Algiers tourists know, not the ferry ride and the jazz and the pretty houses along the point. The other Algiers. The one that exists in the spaces between those things. In the back kitchens and the overgrown lots. In the places where the old families still practice what they've always practiced. Quiet and careful and away from eyes that wouldn't understand. You see, some people of the bayou know this truth. Everything has a price. Every gift, every power, every door you open in the dark. It costs something. And if you take without paying, the debt doesn't disappear. It waits. They call it Dette Rouge, the red debt. And in the 43 years Cynthia Lashawn Morgan had been alive, she had never once stopped running from it. Until the year she decided to stop. She was known as St to her colleagues at Delacroix Academy, a high school that sat on the edge of St. Bernard Parish like it was trying to decide whether to belong there or not. She'd been teaching 11th grade English there for 11 years, department head for 4, the kind of teacher parents requested by name and administrator pointed to during evaluations. Composed, precise, the kind of woman who kept her classroom at exactly the right temperature and her grade book updated to the hour. The kind of woman who never raised her voice because she never had to. The people she grew up with called her Bug. Had since she was 7 years old when the neighborhood kids started saying her eyes were too big for her face. Bug-eyed, they called her, staring, weird. The kind of child who watched everything and said nothing, and made other children uneasy without trying. It had started as cruelty, the way those things always start. But her grandmother had taken the name and made it something else. Said those big eyes meant she saw things other people missed. Said that was a gift, not a flaw. Said Bug was exactly right for a child who noticed the world so clearly. The grandmother had loved her fiercely and specifically and in a way that made the teasing bearable. The grandmother had also known even then that the darkness didn't frighten this child the way it should. St didn't think about Bug much anymore. Hadn't for years. She'd worked very hard to make sure of that. She was 16 when she first found the book. It had belonged to her grandmother. A slim, water-stained thing with no title on the cover, written in a mix of French, Creole, and something older that she couldn't name. Her grandmother had kept it wrapped in red cloth in the bottom of a cedar chest, and she told Cynthia exactly once, "That is not for you, baby. That is not for anyone who wants to stay who they are." Her grandmother died that winter, and Bug, who had always crawled into dark spaces to see what lived there, unwrapped the red cloth and opened the book. She spent 2 years with it. 2 years of small things at first. Whispered words over candle flames, symbols drawn in the margins of her notebooks, tiny requests made to something that seemed to live in the space just behind the visible world. And it worked. Not dramatically, not in ways she could prove, but in ways she felt. A teacher who had been failing her suddenly warmed. The boy she wanted noticed her. A girl who'd been making her life miserable transferred schools without warning. Small things. She told herself they were coincidences. And then she asked for something larger. She never told anyone what she asked for, not in 27 years. She carried it the way you carry a stone in your chest. Always there, always heavy, the weight of it so familiar, she sometimes forgot it wasn't just how breathing felt. What she knew was this: she got what she asked for, and she didn't pay the price the book required. She closed it, wrapped it back in the red cloth, and buried it in the backyard of her grandmother's house, on a Tuesday night in February. She left Algiers 3 months later on a full academic scholarship and never looked back. Dette Rouge did not forget. The girl showed up in her third period class on the first day of the school year, wearing a look Cynthia recognized like a reflection. Destiny Roche, 16, Algiers address. Emergency contact. Grandmother. Sharp eyes. Quiet mouth. The particular stillness of a child who had learned early that the world was more interesting if you watched it instead of performing for it. She sat in the back corner not because she was disengaged, but because she wanted the full view of the room. She answered questions precisely, without excess. She turned in work that was better than it needed to be for a class she clearly wasn't being challenged by. St recognized all of it. She recognized something else too, 2 weeks into the semester. A smell that clung faintly to the girl's jacket. Copper and beeswax and something herbal and bitter underneath. Faint enough that nobody else would have noticed it. St noticed it because she used to smell the same way. She told herself it was nothing. Coincidence. The girl probably burned candles for ambiance like half the teenagers in New Orleans. She told herself this with the particular discipline she had spent 27 years perfecting. She almost believed it. It was the notebook that broke her composure. 6 weeks into the semester, Destiny left it behind after class. A spiral notebook, dark green cover, unremarkable except for what was written inside the front cover in small, careful handwriting. St opened it to return it. The symbols on the inside cover stopped her cold, not because they were unfamiliar, because she had drawn the same ones herself, in the same careful hand, in the same corners of her own notebooks, 27 years ago in Algiers. She stood alone in her classroom for a long time after the bell rang, the notebook open in her hands, the symbols looking back at her like old acquaintances she'd hoped never to see again. Then she closed it, put it in her desk drawer, and locked it. She told herself she was keeping it safe until she could return it. She didn't return it. Destiny asked about the notebook 3 days later, carefully, without accusation. "I think I left something in your class," she said after the other students had filed out. "A notebook." "Green cover," St said. "Yes, ma'am." St looked at her for a long moment. The girl met her eyes without flinching. That stillness, that particular watchful stillness. "What's in it?" St asked. Something shifted in Destiny's expression, just slightly. "Notes," she said. "What kind of notes?" "A beat. The kind my grandmother taught me." St set down her pen. "Your grandmother from Algiers." It wasn't a question. Destiny heard that and her eyes narrowed slightly. "You know Algiers." "I'm from there." The girl studied her with those sharp, quiet eyes. "Then you know what the notes are," she said finally. St held her gaze for a long moment. Then she unlocked the desk drawer and held out the notebook. "Go home," she said quietly. "Burn what you've started. Don't look at that book again." Destiny took the notebook slowly. "You sound like you know what happens if I don't." "I do," St said. "Go home." The girl left. St sat in her empty classroom until it got dark outside, her hands flat on the desk, staring at nothing. She'd recognized the symbols. She had recognized the smell. She had recognized the girl. What she hadn't told Destiny, and what she hadn't told anyone in 27 years, was that she recognized the specific page those symbols came from, the sequence, the particular working they were building toward. It was the same working she had started at 16, the one she had never finished, the one that required a price she hadn't been willing to pay. Dette Rouge didn't just wait. It found new hands to do its unfinished work. She drove to Algiers on a Thursday evening. She hadn't been back in 11 years. The neighborhood had changed in the ways all neighborhoods change. Some houses freshened, some fallen further into themselves, new faces on old porches. She drove past her grandmother's house without stopping, noting only that someone had put a fresh coat of paint on it. Yellow now. It had been green when she was a child. She parked on a street she hadn't thought about in over a decade and knocked on a door she'd told herself she'd never knock on again. The woman who answered was old and small and looked at St with eyes that communicated clearly that she'd been expecting this visit for some time. Her name was Madeleine Fontenot. She had known Scent's grandmother. She'd known Scent as Bug as a child, as a teenager with a borrowed book and borrowed power and no idea what she was building toward. "You look tired," Madeleine said. "I need to know about Dette Rouge," Scent said. "What happens when it finds someone else?" Madeleine was quiet for a moment. Then she stepped back from the door. "Come in," she said. "I'll make coffee." The red debt, Madeleine explained, was not a curse. Not exactly. It was more like a contract, one that didn't require your signature to be binding, only your participation. The moment you opened the door, the moment you took the first thing offered, you were party to it. "You took," Madeleine said simply, "something significant, something the working required payment for." "I know," Scent said. "You didn't pay?" "No." "So it waited." Madeleine wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. Dette Rouge is patient. It doesn't chase, it just redirects, finds another entry point, someone connected to the original debt by blood or place or intention. "She's from Algiers," Scent said. "Her grandmother practiced." "Then she's close enough," Madeleine said. "The debt will work through her. She'll feel it as power at first. Then the cost will become clear." "What's the cost?" Madeleine looked at her steadily. "The same thing it always costs. The same thing you refuse to give." Scent was quiet for a long moment. Outside, a dog barked twice and went silent. "Can it be stopped?" she said. "The debt can be paid," Madeleine said carefully, "by the original party, or..." She paused. "It can be redirected again, back to its source, if someone with knowledge of the working intervenes directly." "Intervenes how?" Madeleine looked at her for a long time. "You know how, Cynthia," she said quietly. "You've always known. That's why you ran." She drove back across the river in the dark. She sat in her car outside her apartment for a long time before going inside. She thought about Destiny Roche, the sharp eyes, the stillness, the particular hunger she recognized because she had carried the same hunger at 16 and spent 27 years disciplining it into something that looked like composure from the outside. She thought about what she had asked for at 16, what she had received, what she had buried in the backyard of her grandmother's house, along with the book, and told herself was done. She thought about the weight in her chest she'd carried so long, she'd forgotten what breathing felt like without it. Dette Rouge had found destiny because of her. The girl was sitting in a classroom in St. Bernard Parish, pulling at threads she didn't understand because Cynthia Lashawn Morgan had refused to pay a debt 27 years ago. There was a version of this where she went back to destiny, warned her more seriously, took the notebook and burned it herself, tried to intervene in the way a teacher intervenes, with authority, with care, with the full weight of her responsibility toward this child. She sat with that version for a long time, Then she thought about something Madeline hadn't said directly, but had implied clearly. The debt could be redirected back to its source by someone with knowledge of the working, by someone willing to complete what had been started, by someone willing to finally pay, or willing to make someone else pay in their place. She went inside. She made tea. She slept better than she had in years. She invited the girl to stay after class on a Wednesday, 3 weeks after the visit to Algiers. She had spent those 3 weeks being exactly who she always was. Composed, precise, temperature of the room, exactly right. She had graded Destiny's papers with the same careful attention she gave every student. She had asked about her grandmother, warmly, as a teacher asks. She had built exactly the kind of trust that a student builds with a teacher who sees them. Destiny had relaxed, had started to believe that Ms. Morgan, St, was someone who understood, someone safe. After the other students left, St closed the classroom door. She had driven to school that morning with a clear intention: pay the debt herself, do what she should have done at 16. Give this girl her freedom and finally close the ledger the right way. She had even felt something like peace about it on the drive over. A resigned, quiet readiness she hadn't expected to feel so clean. She set 2 candles on her desk. Beeswax, unscented. The kind her grandmother had always used. Destiny watched her. "What are you doing?" she said. "Something I should have done a long time ago," St said. And that was true. She believed it when she said it. She began drawing the symbols from memory, the ones that had lived in the back of her mind for 27 years. The sequence, the specific working. Her hand moved with a steadiness that surprised her. The knowledge hadn't faded at all. It had just been waiting, patient as everything else about Dette Rouge, for her to use it again. Destiny went very still, watching. And somewhere in the drawing, somewhere between the 3rd symbol and the 4th, somewhere in the particular silence of a classroom after school, with 2 candles burning and a girl watching, with eyes that were just like hers had been, something shifted in Scent's chest. Not the weight lifting, something else. Something older and uglier and more honest. She looked at Destiny Roche, 16, sharp eyes, hungry, from Algiers. Grandmother who practiced, everything Cynthia Lashawn Morgan had been at that age. And she thought, why? The pencil stopped moving. Why should I? She had spent 43 years being told what she was, bug-eyed, weird, too much, wrong. She had spent 27 years being told what she owed, a debt she never agreed to, a price set by something that didn't ask her permission before it chose her. St put down her pen. Bug picked it back up. She had defied destiny her whole life, crawled out of Algiers on nothing but will, built herself from scratch, became something nobody from that block expected her to become. Why stop now? Why stop here? For a girl she barely knew, for a debt she never signed, for a world that had never once asked if the cost was fair. She looked at Destiny Roche across the candlelight, and for the first time in 27 years, she stopped apologizing for what she was. Destiny shifted in her chair. "Ms. Morgan." "Bug," she said quietly. "My name is Bug." She completed the working. The girl's sharp eyes went wide and then went somewhere else entirely. The weight in Scent's chest lifted. She hadn't planned that. Not exactly. She had come here to do the right thing, and somewhere between the 3rd symbol and the 4th, the right thing had simply stopped making sense to her. 27 years of carrying something that wasn't hers to carry alone. 27 years of discipline and running and building walls around a self she'd been told was wrong. She didn't feel guilty. That was the part that should have frightened her. She felt clear. She blew out the candles, straightened the desks, picked up her bag. At the door she paused and looked back at Dette Rouge, who sat very still in her chair with her hands in her lap and her eyes open and nothing behind them. She thought about something she'd overheard in the teacher's lounge 2 weeks ago. Ms. Turod and Ms. Picou eating lunch, talking low the way people talk when they want to be overheard just enough. You hear about Odalis's grandson, boy over in the Tremé? What about him? Lights on, but ain't nobody there. Like a zombie, they sang. Just sits and stares. Won't talk, won't eat unless you put food in front of him. Lord, what happened? Nobody knows for certain. Probably messing around with something he had no business with. You know how these kids are. Poor thing. I went to school with her. Odalis is good people. Shame. Then the bell rang, and they threw away their lunch containers and went back to their classrooms, and that was that. St looked at Destiny for one more moment, then she turned off the lights. She drove home through St. Bernard Parish with the windows down. The night air smelled like the river and cut grass and something faintly like copper, fading. The radio played something low and old. She drove without hurry, without the tight-shouldered vigilance she'd maintained for 2 decades, without the constant low hum of something owed and unpaid vibrating in her chest. Just drove. She thought about what came next. 27 years of running had left her with a life she'd built like a fortress. Careful, defended, every stone placed to keep something out. She didn't need the fortress anymore. The thing it had been built to contain wasn't a threat. It was just part of her. Had always been part of her. Bug had always known that. St had spent a long time pretending otherwise. She thought about the book, still buried in her grandmother's backyard under yellow paint and someone else's flowers. She thought about what she now knew how to do and what else the book might have taught her if she'd let it. She thought about the old Algiers knowledge that Madeleine Fontenot carried and what else might be learned from it. She thought about La Dette Rouge. Fully paid now, cleared, the ledger closed. She thought about what other ledgers might be opened. She pulled into her parking spot and sat for a moment in the quiet. For the first time in 27 years, Bug smiled and wondered what she wanted to do next. Some debts don't destroy you. Some debts set you free.